welcome back to I Will Be Okay Thursday. This is part 3 on why I distance myself from New Age spirituality, and the topic for this week's video is how Jung is not a guru. Alright, let me start off by saying that when I went to study analytical psychology, I definitely had these ideas in my head that I was like, Jung was like this spiritual psychologist. He was somebody who was actually attempting to bring spirituality into psychology, which really resonated with me because that was my experience. And I kind of thought, like, for somebody to have these incredible realizations and these theories must have been like this really profoundly spiritual person, right? I was wrong. Not only was Jung, well, yeah, he was pretty much an asshole. He's racist, he's sexist, he was misogynistic, he cheated on his wife all the time. Jung took advantage of a lot of women throughout his career. He slept with a lot of his patients. He crossed many boundaries. Jung was anti-Semitic. He was a distant father. He was really absorbed in his work. He treated a number of women like shit. And where he got so many of his ideas from on analysis were from women, and he didn't credit like any of them. He just took it all for himself. His ideas and his theories about anima and animas was actually inspired, and we're not 100% sure who it was, but we think that it was Sabina Spielrein, who really got the shit end of the stick and is somebody that I am so fascinated with, and I really hope that I can continue to learn more information about her because so much of her work was overlooked and lost, and she was unfortunately murdered during the Holocaust. So Jung didn't grow up very wealthy, but the reason why he had money and the reason why he was able to do anything that he did is because he married a rich woman, which was Emma Jung. Emma Jung was actually really intelligent. She had a lot of her own theories as well, which you could find a lot of them in this book called Woman in the Mirror. Emma Jung, I think, was overlooked so much by Carl Jung. Like, he had a mistress named Toni Wolff. He regarded to Toni Wolff as his spiritual wife, and then Emma was like his actual wife. And supposedly Toni was somebody that really helped him navigate through his unconscious. Like, he felt that in a way she was kind of like his rock, in this conscious world. When he wrote the Red Book, he went through what he called, a creative illness. And basically what happened is he went so deep into his unconscious, and this book is just filled with mandalas and things that he wrote, and during that time, supposedly, Toni Wolff was his right-hand woman, per se. But it's sad because, we really don't even hear a lot about Toni, and Jung said really wonderful things about her, about how intelligent she was, about how remarkable she was as a psychologist, and yet nothing's come out about her. Nothing has really come out so much, and partly that's due to his family keeping a lot of, information secret. So I want to get off the topic of him being an asshole for a bit, and I want to talk a little bit about his theories. So a lot of his theories, like I said, were actually inspired by other people, very directly with these women, but as well, the ideas of the unconscious weren't first brought up by him. They were actually brought up by two incredible thinkers, Schelling and Carus. And the unconscious is not this super beautiful place of warm feelings. The unconscious also has a lot of darkness and ugliness into it, and that's something I think the New Age has overlooked. In a way, the New Age has appropriated a lot of Jung's theories by thinking it's all love and light and turn darkness into light, when Jung incorporates very much the reality and existence of darkness and evil in the unconscious, in the human psyche, and that it's also a part of God. One of his most remarkable pieces of writing that I read last year was his Answer to Job essay, which is basically kind of like a commentary on the actual story in the Bible. And Jung talks about this dual nature of God, and that evil exists just as much as good does, and that evil exists in God just as much as good does. So basically his commentary really points to this idea that, like, it doesn't matter how innocent you are, it doesn't matter how religious you are, evil and suffering at some point in your life will meet you. Not only in Answer to Job, but in so many of Jung's writings, there was this presence of, paradoxes and juggling with paradoxes. He basically says that really, like, the reality of life, the reality of the human experience is that, we think that all things good are God, but that's maybe not the case. He also says in Answer to Job that God sounds like a superhuman with a narcissistic personality disorder. And I thought that was a really unique way of describing it because, we're so used to hearing these religions speak about God in this really, like, almighty, benevolent way. But when you look at life, when you look at human experiences, I personally think that there's this spectrum of experience that exists within consciousness, and we are all different points of consciousness experiencing ourselves as ourselves. All of these dualities, all of these paradoxes exist in our existence, and yet we want to damn certain parts and not accept others when the totality of the human experience is probably divine in every way possible, if you want to use that word. As well, the concepts of anima and animus are very often highly spiritualized in the New Age movement, but when you really look at the anima and animus descriptions in Carl Jung's theories, anima and animus is literally just a reiteration of socialized gender roles. And, before I thought it was like, wow, the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and now I'm kind of like, well, there's definitely opposites, and there's a beauty to those opposites, and the paradoxical nature of the universe. But, like, do we really know what is, like, divinely feminine, and what is divinely masculine outside of our rigid gender roles? So now I want to talk about archetypes. Archetypes, as much as they have a light side, have a very real dark side. The only thing that Jung really strongly believed about a benevolent being, and also in terms of, like, archetypes, was he felt the most strongly about the archetype of the capital S self. I'm going to read a quote to you now written by David Tassie, and it says, "It is primarily the archetype of the self that adopts a benevolent, supportive role toward the ego, assisting it in its plight and helping it through difficult times. The self often helps the ego along its way, sometimes offering a prophetic dream, a clear insight, or a dream animal which shows the way through the impasse." Now, Marie-Louise from France, she's one of my favorite analysts, a woman. Woo! When she was teaching at the Jung Institute in Zurich, she noticed that a lot of the students really were a bit like blasé towards this phenomena that would happen in their psyche, and kind of took it for granted that the self, really would come to the ego's rescue. When I was younger, when I was, like, having an issue, it was always like, oh my god, I needed to call like 70 people. I feel like I needed help from so many people outside of me. But I've reached a point now where sometimes I'm going through a really hard time, I just want to be alone. And there comes a point sometimes where, like, I'll be sitting with myself and suddenly a thought comes through and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need to be that sad. Or something will come through and it's like, girl, you're gonna be fine. And I'm like, yes, I'll be fine. So I think when people don't recognize this, when they think that there's, like, this, outside, like, spiritual force which is doing all this work, and not really looking at this, like, internal self and how that's coming through to rescue the psyche, it does give people this false sense of security and this false sense of even responsibility. And unfortunately, I think that takes away from a very important process of self-transformation that we need to do. I really think that part of why we're alive, part of why our souls are here, is because we're meant to do things, correct things, be responsible, treat people with like love and respect as much as we can. We put too much like weight and responsibility onto this outside force. It's weird because I've seen it where people do that, and then yet they're putting like so much more pressure on themselves. And I think it's again this really unhealthy narrative that like, oh well, if I'm acting in this particular way, then the sacred is going to do these particular things to me. Like these crazy televangelists who are like, if you do this, then God will give you a car. And then you look and they have all of these fucking like private airplanes, they're living in mansions, and you're like, I'm sorry, but that's not God. That's someone taking advantage of a lot of people. So don't let that be you. Taking into consideration and recognizing how important it is to engage with the self and appreciate that inner self and what it does for you can honestly protect you from a lot of shit outside in the world. Now I want to talk a bit about one of Jung's writings, which was called The Spirit of Mercurius. This piece of writing I thought was really interesting because it was kind of hard to grasp, and it felt like it was something really written from a place of intuition per se. And Jung talks about this kind of chaotic being. You know, chaos and like Dionysian energy is something that Jung talked about a lot. And if you know anything about Dionysus was like the god of chaos. A god of chaos existed in so many different myths throughout the world's history and throughout the world's culture presently. This god of chaos, or you know, this essence of God as being chaotic, I think is also something that the New Age really hasn't spoken about, which is very, very present in Jung's theories. You know, we leave out these ugly parts of God because we don't want to face them. You know, I think there's so much security and there's so much more of a feeling of like peace and contentment when you don't have to think that the world is chaotic, when you don't have to think that, you know, there isn't something safe there, because it feels safer to be like, well, I know it's in like God's hands, but to like really look at the reality of things and think like, wait a minute, there are just things in life that don't fucking make sense, and there's absolute chaos in the world at all points in history. I think that when we're able to encapsulate those ideas and those attributes to God, I think it's so much easier for us to accept those attributes within ourselves. In a couple weeks' time, the head of the Department of Jungian Studies at the University of Essex is going to join me for a video explaining a little bit more in depth about Jung's racism. As well, I don't want this video to last too long, but in the future I am going to make a video about Jung and feminism, because I think that that's something that, you know, he did bring, you know, into the forefront. He was the first psychologist to genuinely explore the feminine. Now, he was, like I said, pretty misogynistic, and there were a lot of things that he said in his writings that were honestly deplorable about women, and I will read one quote to you. "Unintelligent people, and particularly women, protect themselves with the help of value predicates. This often presents a very comical picture. Value predicates are attributes of feeling, such as beautiful, good, dear, sweet, friendly, etc. One often notices in conversation how certain people find everything interesting, charming, good, lovely, or if they are English, fine, marvelous, grand, splendid, and a great favorite, fascinating, all of which serve either to cover up their total lack of interest or to hold the object at arm's length." Now you don't see anybody talking about that, do you? So, in conclusion, Jung is not a guru, and why is that? He's a human being. He was incredibly flawed. He was an asshole, honestly. People will say, well, he was a man of his time, but that is not a reason. That's not how we wrap things up for people. If you did problematic things in the past and we recognize now that they're problematic, they're still problematic then, even if it was a common way of seeing things. And his theories are remarkable, but I would say that his theories are very classical. They're very much of his time, his theories. And I think that personally, a post-Jungian approach to psychology is much more fitting and has evolved more with the times and with our, research and science and evolution as humans. I think that a post-Jungian approach is much more apt to where we are now. A lot of what he said was quite traditional and a little conservative for me, but I do think that, his ability and honestly bravery to be willing to explore the things that he did was very different, and with his background in science and medicine, he was able to bring it into the mainstream, which is something that I do appreciate and that I can't take away from him. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Next week is going to be part 4 and also the final video on why I distance myself from New Age spirituality, and this video is going to address misconceptions about synchronicity. So stay tuned and have a wonderful weekend.